Hello guys and welcome to a new episode in Romeo and Juliet. If you're a student and you're browsing around to find a video that will help you fully understand Romeo and Juliet, then you hit the right place. Go grab your pen and paper and get ready for today's session. Now, let me show you the steps that we will be following. Number 1, we'll talk about the characters and the setting of the story. Number 2, we'll give you a detailed summary of all the events in the story. Number 3, we'll discuss all the themes in the story. Number 4, we'll discuss all the literary elements and the language terms, such as foreshadowing, symbolism, metaphor, oxymorons, puns, allusion, and many more. Okay, so let's start with number 1, which is the characters. The first character that we have is Romeo. Romeo is a handsome, intelligent, and sensitive, though impulsive and immature. His idealism and passion make him an extremely likable character. He lives in the middle of the violent feud between his family, the Montagues, and Juliet's family, the Capulets. But he's not at all interested in the violence. The second character we have is Juliet. Juliet is a young, innocent teenage girl, but she's also decisive and headstrong. And the situations that take place in the story will let you know this. The third character we have is Rosaline. We did not hear anything from her at all. We only heard Romeo talking about her. So according to Romeo, Rosaline is a beautiful, completely unavailable. Romeo tells us she is sworn off boys by taking a vow of chastity. The fourth character we have is Mercutio. Mercutio is Romeo's best friend. Mercutio likes to have a good laugh. He is optimistic, loyal, and a very good friend. The fifth character is Benvolio. Benvolio plays a variety of roles within the story. He's a peacemaker, problem solver, a counselor who provides a voice of reason, a good friend, and a trustworthy character. The seventh character we have is Tybalt from the Capulets. Tybalt is Juliet's cousin. He's strong, willed, argumentative, passionate, and loyal. Tybalt is argumentative when he speaks to any of the Montagues family. He hates them so much. The eighth character that we have is the nurse. The nurse is a kind, loving, and want the best for Juliet. The nurse loves Juliet like a daughter. She has brought her up and breastfed her when she was a child. So she's like a mother for her. Although she's working at their house, but she's like a mother for her. The ninth character is Friar Lawrence. Friar Lawrence is typically analyzed as wise, trustworthy, caring, and well-intentioned. He works like a monk. Number 10, Lord Capulet. Lord Capulet is Juliet's father. Number 11, Lady Capulets, Juliet's mother, is quite a timid, unknowing, and selfish character. She appears to be frightened of her husband and does not love her daughter like a mother should. The last character we have is the prince is formal and pomp. In action, he's quick and decisive. In judgment, he's fair in his examination of witnesses before pronouncing his verdict. Verdict means like before taking a decision or a judgment. We have other characters, Lady Montague and Lord Montague. We have also Friar Joan and Balthazar. Balthazar is Romeo's servant. Friar Joan is a monk who's working in another church. Lord and Lady Montagues are Romeo's parents. These are all the characters that we have in Romeo and Juliet. Now, let's jump to number 2, which is a detailed summary of the plot. Make sure you have a pen and paper handy so you can jot down any important notes. The story of Romeo and Juliet starts during a bloody feud, and feud, guys, means a prolonged quarrel or a fight. So the story of Romeo and Juliet starts during a bloody feud between two noble families in the city of Verona, the Capulets and the Montagues. One day, two servants of the house of the Capulet named Samson and Gregory start a street fight with the Montagues men. In the middle of the fight, a Montague kingsman named Benvolio draws his sword to try to stop the fight. In response, Tybalt, a member of the Capulets family, draws his sword too, but not for stopping the fight, for escalating the fight. Tybalt and Benvolio are completely opposite characters. Benvolio wanted to stop the fight and Tybalt wants to escalate the fight. So again, Tybalt, a member of the Capulets family, draws his sword too and tells Benvolio that he despises even the thought of peace with the Montagues. And despises, guys, means he hates so much. This shows how much he hates the Montague. At this moment, the mob joins the fight. As the brawl escalates, the two heads of the household enter the scene, Lord Montagues and Lord Capulet. They both wanted to join the fight, but their wives stopped them. In the middle of the chaos, Prince of Verona arrives and stops the fight. He then announces that from now on, anyone who disturbs the public peace will be executed. When the mob disperses, when the crowd and the people disperses, like went away, Lord Montague and his wife ask their nephew Benvolio if he has any news of their son Romeo. Benvolio replies that he last saw Romeo outside the city wandering around the grove. The lord and the lady say that their son is not like his old self anymore and is often sad and depressed. Benvolio promises his uncle to find out the reason behind his cousin's sadness. After a short conversation, Romeo reveals to Benvolio that he is in love with a girl named Rosaline, but she doesn't love him back and has taken a vow of chastity. Chastity means to stay alone without getting married. Benvolio encourages his cousin to look for love among other beautiful girls and forget Rosaline. But Romeo contends that Rosaline is the most beautiful girl in all of Verona and he can't love another one. On the other side, Lord Capulet is accompanied by a noble kinsman of Prince of Verona. His name was Paris. During their conversation, Paris reveals his desire to marry the Lord's daughter, Juliet, to which the Capulet happily agrees but reminds Paris that Juliet is not yet 14 and he must wait for 2 years before she's ready to marry. He then invites Paris to a traditional masquerade. Masquerade, guys, means a party where the people wear masks, like a full show party. Anyway, and he tells him that it will be the perfect opportunity for him to steal Juliet's heart. Lord Capulet then orders one of his servants named Peter to compile a list of the noble family and invite them to the party. Peter, who's illiterate, which means he can't read or write, is worried that he won't be able to finish the job properly. At the same time, Romeo and Benvolio still argue about Romeo's love for Rosaline and whether he will be able to banish her from his heart or not. Peter, the Capulet servant, randomly sees the two men in the street. Without knowing that they are from the Montagues, he asks them to read the list for him, so he knows if you forgot to invite anyone. When Romeo reads the list, he sees Rosaline's name on it, while inviting the two gentlemen to the party, without knowing that they are Montagues. Benvolio persuades Romeo to go to the party. This will be the perfect opportunity for him to compare Rosaline to the rest of the beautiful ladies of Verona. Romeo agrees to go to the masquerade not because he was convinced with what Benvolio had told him, but because Rosaline will be there. Now, in the Capulets' household, Juliet, the nurse, and Lady Capulet were joking. Lady Capulet asks Juliet how she feels about getting married and informs her of Paris's interest in her. Juliet tells her mother that she will consider Paris and will look upon him at the party to see if she could fall in love with him. On the other side, Romeo, Benvolio, and their friend Mercutio were getting ready for the Capulets' party. So Romeo then tells everyone, while preparing for the party, he told them that he has a foreboding feeling that his attending at this party will set in motion things that will bring upon his death. Now, at the Capulets' home, the party is full swing. Romeo, Benvolio, and Mercutio enter the party, wearing masks. Everyone is having a good time, and suddenly Romeo's eyes land on Juliet. He asks a servant who the lady is, but the servant replies that he doesn't know. He's so mesmerized by Juliet's beauty that he completely forgets about Rosaline, and he admits that he did not know what love is until the moment he meets Juliet. At this moment, Lord Capulet's cousin Tybalt recognizes Romeo's voice and ordered his servant bring his sword right now. Lord Capulet overhears Tybalt's conversation with his servant, and he went quickly to Tybalt and he forbids him to harm young Romeo, reminding him that he is a well-respected young man in Verona and he cannot harm anyone in his house. Tybalt reluctantly respects his uncle's wish, but vows to punish the Montagues for this insult because they entered the Capulets' party without permission and without invitation. Meanwhile, Romeo has approached Juliet and held her hand in a beautiful way. He compares Juliet's hand to a holy shrine which means holy place, and he kept telling her good words about her beauty and how much his... Right at this moment, the nurse arrives and tells Juliet that her mother wants to speak to her. When Juliet leaves, Romeo asks the nurse, who is Juliet's mother? And when he finds out that Juliet is a Capulet, he was extremely shocked. As the party comes to an end and the crowd begins to leave, Juliet asks the nurse to identify a few of the young men in the hope of finding out Romeo's identity. When the nurse tells her that the stranger who she had met her was Romeo of Lord Montague, she was shocked as well. After everybody went home, Romeo was desperate to see Juliet again. The next day, he climbs up the wall of the Capulets' property and hides in their garden. Romeo tries to find Juliet's room to see her again. Few moments later, Juliet appears at one of the windows. Romeo listens as she speaks to herself and complains about her luck and the fact that Romeo is a Montague. The girl, surprised by his sudden appearance, asks him how he managed to get there and that he would be killed if her family found out. Romeo answers that love guided him to her and love will protect him from his enemies. The two then confess their love for each other, and Romeo pledges that he will be forever loyal to her. Suddenly, the nurse calls Juliet. Before leaving, she tells Romeo that she will send him a confidant at 9 in the morning to know if Romeo truly wants to marry her. In the morning, Friar Lawrence, the monk, who is exceptionally good at understanding the natural properties of plants and herbal medicine, is busy collecting flowers when Romeo arrives at his monastery. Romeo informs him that he has moved from Rosaline and madly in love with Juliet. He then begs Friar Lawrence to marry them in secret. The monk first says that Romeo is young and his love is weak and feckless. But when Romeo replies that Rosaline did not love him back and Juliet does truly love him, he agrees to marry the two in hope of ending the long-lasting fight between their families. Romeo's cousin Benvolio and his friend Mercutio wonder what happened to Romeo last night. Benvolio reveals that they have received a letter from Tybalt, Juliet's cousin, challenging him for a duel. Hearing this, Mercutio goes on a rant about Tybalt's proficiency in sword fighting and his perfect style and how much he's strong. As they speak, Romeo arrives. And the moment he walks in, Mercutio begins mocking him. He then scolds him for abandoning his friends last night. He left them and went to Juliet. So after a short banter with Mercutio, he tells Romeo that he better not betray Juliet's trust. Romeo asks the nurse to tell Juliet to go to Friar Lawrence. The nurse agrees to give the message to Juliet and make a lad out of clothes to let Romeo join Juliet on their wedding night. Juliet waits impatiently for her nurse to come back. 3 hours later, she finally arrives. And after a comedic back and forth with Juliet, where she claims she's too tired to tell her what Romeo's response was, she eventually relays to Juliet that she must meet with her love Romeo at Friar Lawrence's confession cell. Romeo and Friar Lawrence await Juliet's arrival. Romeo passionately speaks of his devotion to Juliet and tells the monk that he does not care about any trouble that might arise from their marriage. Friar Lawrence advises Romeo to love moderately and reminds him that violent delights could have violent ends. Next, Juliet arrives, and after a romantic exchange with Romeo, where she claims that her love for Romeo beyond measure, they get married. Benvolio and Mercutio walk in the streets of Verona. From the other side, Tybalt, accompanied by a few of the Capulets' men, walk in, and after seeing the Montague's kinsmen, seeing Tybalt's arrogant attitude, Mercutio begins to provoke him. At this moment, Romeo enters, and Tybalt accuses him of villainy and challenges him to a duel. Romeo kindly addressed Tybalt and tells him that he has a great reason to love him and asks him to sheath his sword, means to put down his sword, until the time he finds out the reason for Romeo's newfound friendship with him. At this moment, Mercutio draws his sword and starts a fight with Tybalt. In a faithful moment, when Romeo puts himself between the two to stop the fight, Tybalt stabs Mercutio from under Romeo's arms and runs away. Mercutio falls, and before dying, he curses both families. Romeo was enraged. He became so furious. He was in deep sorrow because his best friend died because of him. He was also disappointed at himself for refusing to fight Tybalt, and complains that Juliet's love made him a coward. A few seconds later, Tybalt rushes back into the scene. This time, Romeo draws his sword, and after a short fight, Romeo kills Tybalt. Before they know it, the mob enters the scene and calls for Romeo to be arrested. Benvolio tells Romeo that he must run away before the prince figures out about what happened, as he will surely execute him. Romeo flees the scene while calling himself the fortunate fool. At this moment, the prince, accompanied by the Capulets and the Montagues, arrive. Benvolio tries to explain to everyone that Romeo did his best to defuse the situation and avoid the fight, but Lady Capulet accuses him of being a Montague and covering for his skin. The Capulets then ask for Romeo to be executed, for which the prince replies that he will exile Romeo from the city, and if he is ever seen in Verona again, he will be executed. So now poor Romeo has no choices. He needs to run for his life. At home, Juliet waits for the night to be with Romeo. Suddenly, the nurse walks in and gives her the news of the fight. The nurse is agitated that she mixes up her words, which makes Juliet think that Romeo has killed himself. The nurse then explains a bit more, and Juliet thinks that both Tybalt and Romeo have been killed. Finally, when the nurse mourns Tybalt's death at Romeo's hand and tells Juliet of his punishment, Juliet scolds Romeo and curses nature for putting demonic spirit in Romeo's flesh. The nurse agrees with Juliet and curses Romeo, but Juliet immediately scolds her for rebuking her husband. She then tells the nurse that Romeo's banishment is worse than the death of 10,000 Tybalt. She then laments that with Romeo's banishment, she will die a maiden widow. The nurse tells her that she knows where Romeo is hiding. When Juliet knows that the nurse knows where Romeo is hiding, she gives the nurse a ring to give to Romeo as a token for her love for him. Romeo hides at Friar Lawrence's monastery. The monk tells him that the prince has only banished him from Verona, to which he replies that living without Juliet and far from her is a penalty worse than death. So for him, it's better to die than living without Juliet. How? While they were talking, the nurse arrives, and seeing her, Romeo assumes that Juliet must hate her now. Romeo assumes that Juliet must hate him now. He then threatens to stab himself. Friar Lawrence stops him and tells him that he has to be thankful that after such a messy brawl, both he and Juliet are alive. Then the nurse gives Romeo Juliet's ring and tells him that she's still awaiting him for the wedding. Friar Lawrence devises a plan and advises Romeo that after spending the night with Juliet, he must leave Verona before sunrise and go to Mantua until things calm down and hopefully the prince changes his mind. Next, Lord and Lady Capulet speak to Paris and discuss his marriage to Juliet. Lady Capulet tells Paris that she will get Juliet's answer by tomorrow. And Lord Capulet says that he's sure his daughter will listen to him. Then they agree on the upcoming Thursday as their wedding day. After spending the night with Juliet, Romeo prepares to leave. Juliet tries to convince him that morning is not yet near and that the bird that sings is a nightingale, not the morning bird. Romeo tearfully bids farewell to his love and promises that he will send her a message any chance that he could get. Next, Lord and Lady Capulet enter and tell Juliet that they have promised her to Paris and she has to get ready for the wedding on Thursday. Juliet tells them that she will not marry Paris. Her father then threatens to disown her. Then they left. When they leave, Juliet asks the nurse what to do, and the nurse answers that she should go ahead and marry Paris since Romeo will be killed soon anyway. As disappointed as Juliet becomes with her nurse, she pretends to accept her counsel and tells her that she will go to Friar Lawrence's confession Then she vows to never trust the nurse's counsel and takes her own life if the monk is unable to help. In Friar Lawrence's cell, Paris speaks to the priest about his upcoming marriage to Juliet and tells him that Juliet's grief for her cousin Tybalt is so severe and that her father wants her to marry as soon as possible to distract her at this moment. Her father urging the marriage so that she can forget about what happened to her cousin Tybalt. While speaking, Juliet entered. At this moment, Juliet enters. Paris speaks to her in a loving but haughty tone, and Juliet responds to him with utter indifference. When he left, Juliet brandishes a dagger and tells the monk that if he doesn't help her to avoid getting married to Paris, she will kill herself. The priest devises a plan and tells Juliet to first accept Paris's proposal. Then on the night of her wedding, she must drink a sleeping poison that should take her in, which will make her look dead. After her family put her to rest in the Capulet family's tomb, he will let Romeo know to come and take her. This was the plan. Juliet agrees to the priest's plan, and Friar Lawrence gives her the potion. When Juliet returns home, her household is preparing for wedding. For her parents' surprise, she consents that she wanted to marry Paris and apologizes for her earlier behavior. Lord Capulet is so happy that he proposes to move the marriage from Thursday to Wednesday and leaves to give Paris the good news. Next, Juliet asks her mother and nurse to leave her alone for the night. When they left, she pulled out the potion. She wonders what she should do if the mixture is fake and she has to marry Paris in the morning. She also doubts the priest and asks herself, what if it is a poison and Friar Lawrence is only trying to hide his responsibility in her marriage to Romeo by killing her? Or what if Romeo is late? She goes mad from the fear in the tomb. Then she sees a vision of her dead cousin Tybalt and begs him to stop chasing Romeo. At this moment, an impatient Juliet says the name of her lover 3 times and drinks the potion by toasting to Romeo. The next morning, the Capulet household buzzes with the activity and happiness everyone is preparing for the wedding. And the lord and the lady are not sparing any cost. Lady Capulet tells the nurse to go and wake Juliet, to get her ready because Paris could arrive any moment. The nurse finds Juliet dead. Lord and Lady Capulet rush to Juliet's room. At the same moment, Paris enters with Friar Lawrence and a group of musicians. Upon hearing the news, he laments with the Capulets, and Lord Capulet orders all the preparation for the wedding to be transformed into preparation for a funeral. In Mantua, Romeo speaks of a strange dream. In it, Juliet rose him from the dead by kissing him and breathing life back in him. At this moment, his servant Balthazar arrives and gives Romeo the devastating news. Romeo at first doesn't believe him, but when Balthazar insists that he witnessed Juliet's burial with his own eyes, he believes him. Romeo then quickly writes a note to his father and tells him that he will be in Verona at night. He then asks Balthazar if Friar Lawrence gave him any letter, but Balthazar told him no. He didn't receive anything from Friar Lawrence. When the servant leaves, Romeo vows to die with Juliet and buys deadly poison from a wretch at Mantua. Because it's not allowed to sell someone a poison, Romeo bribed him and he gave him the poison. Back to Friar Lawrence monastery, Friar Lawrence speaks to Friar John, whom he had sent earlier with a letter to let Romeo know about the plan, and asks him if he could deliver the letter to Romeo. Friar John replies that he could not deliver the letter to Romeo due to a plague, and he gave the letter back to Friar Lawrence. Terrified by the thought of Juliet waking up alone in the tomb, Friar Lawrence sends another letter to Romeo without knowing of his plan to kill himself. After he knew about what happened to Juliet, Romeo plans to kill himself. Unfortunately, Friar Lawrence doesn't know this. So after sending Romeo the letter, he then gets a crowbar to unseal the tomb and save Juliet herself. At night, Paris enters the graveyard with a servant to scatter flowers on Juliet's grave. Suddenly, Romeo walks in with a crowbar. Paris recognizes the young man and believes that he hates Capulet so much that he has come to disrespect Juliet's and Tybalt's body. So he draws his sword. Romeo tells him He's there to kill himself, and he doesn't want to hurt anyone, but he insisted to arrest him. While they were fighting together, Paris' servant runs back to the town and let the prince know about Romeo's return to Verona. After a short fight, Romeo kills Paris. With his last breath, Paris begs Romeo to lay him to rest somewhere next to Juliet in the tomb. Next, Romeo goes into the Capulets' tomb and sees Juliet lying there. He then tells Juliet about his intention of freeing himself and joining her in eternity. Romeo then kisses Juliet, drinks the poison, and dies. At this moment, Friar Lawrence enters the graveyard. The priest rushes into and finds Romeo and Paris's lifeless bodies lying next to Juliet. Right at this moment, Juliet opens her eyes and wakes. Juliet asks for Romeo, and hearing someone's footsteps, she believes that it is him who's coming to get her. The priest hastily tells her that both Romeo and Paris are dead, and they must hurry and leave, or they will be captured by the prince's men. Juliet sees Romeo's body close to her and refuses to leave. Friar Lawrence, however, rushes away and leaves the girl alone in the tomb. Seeing her true love dead, Juliet decides to join him. She at first tries to kill herself by drinking the remaining of the poison, but it doesn't work. Hearing the footsteps getting closer and closer, she takes Romeo's dagger and she says, "Oh, happy dagger, this is thy death." She stabs herself in the heart and dies in Romeo's hand. When the watchmen arrive, they capture Friar Lawrence and Balthazar around the churchyard. Then the prince and the Capulets enter and find Romeo and Juliet and Paris all dead. After that, the Montague arrives and gives the news of his wife's passing from the grief of Romeo's exile. The prince then shows his son's body to him and orders Friar Lawrence to explain what he knows. The priest tells everyone about the unfortunate lovers' secret marriage and their tragic end. At this moment, Balthazar gives the letter that Romeo wrote to his father to the prince, and upon reading it, the prince approved of the friar's account and the heads of the two families for their childish feud. Devastated by their children's death, the two heads of the families shake each other's hands and end the hostilities. Then each pledged to make gold statue of Romeo and Juliet to always remind them of that woeful tragedy. And this was the end of the story. Number 4, the literary elements and the language terms you need to know. Let's start with number 1, which is irony. What's meant by irony? Irony in general means expectation versus reality. What is expectation versus reality? Expectation is that something that you expect, and the result or what happened was completely opposite. Like if there is a cat and a dog fighting, who's supposed to win? Definitely the dog. What will happen if the cat mopped the floor with the dog? That's irony. Something that you expect and what happened was completely opposite. We have 3 types of irony. Situational irony, and this is the type we have just talked about. We have dramatic irony and we have verbal irony. Dramatic irony happens when the reader knows something the character in the story doesn't know. And it happens when Juliet told her father and told the nurse that she agrees to marry Paris and she just wanted to go to Friar Lawrence to confess something and then she'll be back to prepare for the marriage. We, as readers, we know that she doesn't want this. We know that she went to Friar Lawrence to find a plan, but the characters themselves in the story, they don't know this. So this is dramatic. When the reader knows something, the characters in the story don't. The last type of irony is called verbal irony. Verbal irony happens when what is said is different from what is meant. For example, when you're having a session with a teacher that you don't like at all. He's always giving you a lot of homework, a lot of work to do. And then he asks you, who's your favorite teacher? You're gonna tell him, you are my favorite teacher. Deeply inside, he's not. You hate him so much. So verbal irony, when what is said is different from what is meant. So this was the irony in the story. Number 2, foreshadowing. Foreshadowing happens when the author gives the reader a hint about what will happen in the future. And this happens at the very beginning of the story when Romeo was preparing himself to go to the party with his friends. And he said, guys, I have a foreboding feeling that something will happen in that party that will lead me to death. So this is foreshadowing, when the author gives the reader a hint about what will happen in the future. Number 3, illusion. Allusion is a figure of speech in which a person, an object, or circumstance from unrelated context is referred to, as this person or object or circumstance is well known for a specific trait. Like for example, when I say, if anybody read A Christmas Carol before, when I say, don't act so mean like Scrooge in Christmas Carol. So I'm referring to a person who was well known for this specific trait. When did this happen in the story? There is only one biblical allusion in Romeo and Juliet. In Act 2, Scene 1, Romeo's friend Mercutio referred to young Abraham, Cupid, that he shot so trim. So he referred to this guy because he's well known for this specific trait. This was the only allusion in Romeo and Juliet. Number 4, symbolism. What's meant by symbolism? Symbolism is the idea that things represent another things. Let's say the color red and conclude that itself, but something beyond it. For example, passion, love, or devotion. It also could be the opposite, like blood. So it depends on the situation it is used in. Anyway, symbolism is the idea that things represent another things. One of the symbolisms that was presented in the story was the flower. Shakespeare waves floral symbolism throughout the story. Romeo, the object of Juliet's affection, is considered a rose, which is a specific rose that symbolizes beauty and love. So this was one of the symbols used in the story. Another literary element that we have is the metaphor. So what's meant by metaphor? Metaphor is a comparison between two things without using as or like, or describing one thing as another thing. This is the metaphor. There were so many metaphors in the story. One of them was Act 1, Scene 1, lines 197 and 198, when Romeo says, love is smoke, made of the fume of sighs, being purged, a fire sparkling in lover's eyes. This is an example of a metaphor because it compares love to smoke. So this is a metaphor. And there were so many other examples throughout the story. So just understand the literary elements, and then while reading, you'll find more and more examples. Number 5, the similes. And most of you already know what's meant by a simile, comparing between two things using as or like she is as pretty as an angel. So you compared her to an angel and you used the word as, so that's a simile. When did this happen in the story? At the very beginning of the story, Act 1, Scene 1, line 25, Romeo says, too rude, too boisterous, it pricks like thorn. What Romeo is saying is that from his point of view, love is harsh and harmful, and that it emotionally hurts the people, just like a thorn pricks human skin. So this comparison was done using as or like, so this is a simile. Number 7, oxymoron. What's meant by oxymoron? Oxymoron is a figure of speech that combines two contradictory words, two opposite words right after each other. Like pretty ugly, the big boy, the small mom. When did this happen in the story? It happens in Act 1, Scene 1, from 176 to 186. When Romeo says, brawling love, loving hate, anything of nothing, heavy lightness, and many, many more. So, what's meant by oxymoron? It's a figure of speech that combines two contradictory words with opposing meaning. Number 8, a pun. What's meant by a pun? A pun is a literary device that is also known as a play on words. Like for example, when I say, let's talk about it. When I say, the bicycle is too tired. The word tired here has two meanings. One means the tires, and the other one means that it's too tired to go on. So this is the pun. Right now we'll display some examples for the puns that happen in the story. To recap what we have just said, we will display a picture with all the literary elements that we have just talked about with different examples. If you want to pause the video and write them down, it's okay. If you already got them, you're good to go. Now, let's talk about the language terms that you need to know whenever you are reading any play. At the very beginning of the play, we got something called prologue. Prologue is a brief opening section to a play, spoken by a single actor called chorus. In many plays, a prologue welcomes the audience and gives them a taste of the story. And this happens in the first 14 lines in this story, in Romeo and Juliet. If you attended any theater before and you were watching a play, you will know what I'm talking about. At the very beginning of the play, you'll find someone who will talk to the audience and gives them like introduction to the story. The second term you need to know is the epilogue. Epilogue is a piece of writing at the end of the work of a literature or a drama, usually used to bring closure to work. Number 3, the monologue. As simple as that. The monologue is a speech given by one person in the play to the audience attending that play. Number 4, soliloquy. Soliloquy is a long speech in which a character on stage alone expresses his or her own thoughts and feelings so that the audience know what he or she is thinking of. So this is the soliloquy, when a character on the stage is thinking out loud so that the audience understand his thoughts and feelings. Number 5, aside. Words spoken by a character in the play to the audience. To the audience or another character that are not supposed to be heard by others on the stage. So again, what's meant by aside? Aside is a word spoken by a character to the audience or another character, and these words are not supposed to be heard by others on the stage. This is what's meant by aside. These were all the literary elements, the language terms, the themes, everything you need to know about Romeo and Juliet. I hope we helped you. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.